Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Kristen Welker in Washington, where the Trump administration is heading into a high-stakes diplomatic test with Vice President JD Vance on his way to Pakistan right now for peace talks with Iran. Those are expected to begin tomorrow. But the situation is volatile, with both the U.S. and Iran accusing each other of violating a ceasefire agreement that was supposed to pave the way for these negotiations. This morning, Vice President Vance left Washington, heading to Islamabad, where he will lead the U.S. delegation alongside Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and the president's son-in-law, Jared Kushner. The vice president spoke briefly to reporters, delivering a warning to Iran.
Look, we're looking forward to the negotiation. I think it's going to be positive. We'll, of course, see, as the President of the United States said, if the Iranians are willing to negotiate in good faith, we're certainly willing to extend the open hand. If they're going to try to play us, then they're going to find that the negotiating team is not that receptive. So we're going to try to have a positive negotiation. The President has gave us some pretty clear guidelines, and we're going to see.
Ahead of the talks, President Trump is clearly trying to ramp up pressure on the Iranians and threatening renewed military action if the talks fail. The president posting on social media, Iran is doing a very poor job of reopening the Strait of Hormuz, which he claims Tehran promised to do. Also telling Iran it has, quote, no cards, and saying the only reason they are alive today is to negotiate. In an interview with the New York Post, the president also saying the military is, quote, loading up the ships with the best weapons ever made. And if there's no deal, quote, we will be using those weapons. Tehran, meanwhile, is hitting back. Iran's Speaker of the Parliament, who is leading the Iranian delegation to the peace talks, saying there will be no negotiations unless there is a ceasefire between Israel and the Iranian-backed proxy Hezbollah in Lebanon, along with the release of Iranian assets frozen by sanctions. But these were the images out of southern Lebanon today, another major explosion as Israel continues its heavy bombardment of Hezbollah. As for the Strait of Hormuz, the other major sticking point leading up to this weekend's peace talks, Iran says the strait remains closed, with traffic through that waterway at a near standstill. According to S&P Global Market Intelligence, only 2 vessels transited the strait, none of which were tankers. And joining me now is NBC News senior White House correspondent Garrett Haake and NBC News international correspondent Matt Bradley is in Tel Aviv. Thanks to both of you for starting us off on this high-stakes day. Garrett, let me start with you. The president continuing to accuse Iran of violating the ceasefire. So what exactly is the administration thinking is realistic to get out of these talks?
Yeah, it's a great question. And the White House, as you might expect, is projecting total confidence that they'll get, a sort of broad-based deal out of all of this. But I think the thing that they most need is an agreement on the Strait of Hormuz, the closure of which was the thing that had been most under the president's skin these last couple of weeks, had led to those threats about, erasing Iran's civilization. And to the graphic you just showed, to the point you just made, is still very much not open, despite the fact that that was the basis, the president said, for him declaring this ceasefire to be operational in the first place on Tuesday. So I think that's potentially the lowest hanging fruit, but also the key kind of economic win that they need to achieve out of these talks over the next couple of days. Whether they're able to go beyond that or not, I think is very much an open question. But the administration believes they've been successful enough in their military goals that they don't necessarily need an agreement on, ballistic missiles or nuclear production right now, that they've weakened Iran so much in those areas. They can talk about those things later, perhaps.
Well, it's an interesting timeline that you lay out, Garrett. Let me ask you, because Vice President JD Vance leading these talks. It's notable because, of course, according to our reporting, initially in private conversations with President Trump, he was one of the top voices opposed to going into a war with Iran. Once the president gave the green light, it's our understanding the vice president was on board with making sure that the war was waged effectively. Talk about the stakes for the vice president, who's, of course, a potential 2028 hopeful as well.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I was talking to someone close to the vice president, close to this White House today, who made the point that all of that all of that being said, the vice president goes into this knowing that he is there to speak for the president, not for his own particular political views on this, and that while the president may give him a little bit more latitude than other officials to negotiate, at the end of the day, any deal is going to be something that has to be agreed to by the president. This person also kind of pushed off my question about whether Vance's lack of experience in this area could come back to bite him, basically saying that, the experienced professionals on Iran are the ones who got us into this 47 years of a standoff with the Iranians as they maybe were trying to develop a nuclear weapon. They think Vance brings a certain degree of credibility, tells the Iranians we're serious about peace, and is someone new for them to talk to after they've lost a huge degree of trust in Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff, with whom they were negotiating twice over the last year when the bombs started falling on Iran.
Well, that's such an important point, Garrett, and explains why we may see the vice president there leading this delegation. Let's talk about the political pressures President Trump is feeling at home. We are starting to hear from some of his most outspoken MAGA supporters who are very clear they're not in support of this war. But more so, we're starting to see the impact on the economy, those high gas prices. We got an inflation number today that was not good for the president. And of course, all of the volatility that we've been watching on Wall Street, Garrett. If these talks fall apart, what recourse does the White House have? Is the president going to resume this war, which is so unpopular with the American public?
Yeah, the options are all bad here for the White House if the talks don't work, Chris said. I mean, it speaks to the asymmetry of this moment where the U.S. can dominate Iran on the battlefield, but still need to work with them to get the economic outcomes that we'd like here. But the president insists that he's willing to go right back to dropping bombs and firing missiles. He gave kind of an aggressive sounding interview to the New York Post today saying all the ships are being reloaded in this moment. But all the ships in the world, weren't, at least as they were deployed in this conflict before Tuesday, able to get the Strait of Hormuz open to a degree that, could kind of calm these energy markets. And it's not clear that that'll change, next week or the week after. So really, it's going to be talks, or it's going to be another thing that the White House doesn't really like, which is a reliance on allies globally to perhaps create the kind of coalition that critics have argued should have existed on the front end to police the strait or convince the Iranians that some kind of negotiated settlement, if not peace, is the way to get everybody back to where they want, because those economic numbers are just not sustainable as we head into a midterm year for Republicans, especially with so many of the loudest voices in the MAGA sphere, if you will, the Tucker Carlsons and Megyn Kellys of the world, being very upset to find this administration in this moment.
Yeah, Garrett, I think it's an important point, that term not sustainable. Garrett Haake, starting us off from the White House. Thank you so much, Garrett. Really appreciate it. Matt Bradley, I want to turn to you now, live in Tel Aviv. Talk to me about your conversations with officials in Israel. How closely are they watching these talks in Islamabad? What are they watching for?
Well, very, very closely, of course. I mean, this is a make or break moment. I mean, what they're watching for really is to salvage what they have left, Kristen. The fact is, this all started out with this war in Iran as a dream for Benjamin Netanyahu and his partners in government. And now it's a nightmare. Why? Well, because Israel no longer has any traction on these negotiations. They're going to be doing it secondhand, basically through the United States. They have no diplomatic relations with Pakistan, so they can't even send delegates to this meeting. But this is important because what we've seen in the past couple of weeks is that Israel, you could say, as the kids say, shot their shot. They went after Iran, and now they have essentially some sort of ceasefire that's been imposed on them. And we've seen that in Iran and then lately in Lebanon, the Israelis seeming to rush to catch up to meet their military objectives before the door closes. The door has closed on Iran. The Israelis are no longer firing missiles at Iran, but not in Lebanon. But it is closing with substantial pressure from the Trump administration on Benjamin Netanyahu to stop their fight in Lebanon against Hezbollah in order to push ahead with these treaty negotiations in Pakistan. This is a very, very delicate moment for the Israelis. They are both trying to reach out to the Lebanese government, distinct from Hezbollah, while at the same time continuing their fight against Hezbollah, which is an Iranian proxy. It is a very, very difficult diplomatic maneuver, but it's going to be essential, not just for Israel and Lebanon, but for the U.S. and Iran and the entire region, because it plays such a central role in these negotiations to solidify the ceasefire between Iran on one side and Israel and the U.S. on the other.
Matt, let me follow up with you on that point. President Trump urged Prime Minister Netanyahu to scale back his attacks against Hezbollah in Lebanon. Has that actually happened? What are you seeing there?
Well, it looks as though these are smaller attacks than what we saw about 2 days ago, when we saw what was essentially, as the Israelis described, the largest strikes and the most expansive, most powerful attacks against Hezbollah in generations. So that was hard to beat. So it has diminished since then, since that extremely high level of violence that Israel was meting out against Hezbollah. But whether or not it's gone down to the level of what we might call a restrained fight, or what President Trump wants, or what the Iranians want, or what Hezbollah wants, or what the Lebanese government wants, well, it looks like the Israelis are still continuing to attack Hezbollah in a ferocious manner. Hezbollah is still firing rockets into northern Israel. So the fight over northern Israel's border in Lebanon is not over, not by a long shot. It could be over if President Trump put enough pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu to stop that fight. But for now, it looks like Israel is trying to have it both ways, reaching out to the Lebanese government to create some sort of more permanent diplomatic solution, while at the same time trying to bludgeon Hezbollah, trying to make sure they are finished once and for all militarily, not diplomatically.
All right, Matt Bradley live for us in Tel Aviv. Matt, please continue to stay safe. We really appreciate it. Thank you for that reporting. Joining me now is Pakistan's ambassador to the U.S., Rizwan Saeed Sheikh. As we've said, Pakistan is hosting and mediating this weekend's talks between the U.S. and Iran. Mr. Ambassador, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Kristen, for having me.
Well, this is a critical moment, and Pakistan is the mediator in these high-stakes talks. Let's just set the scene here, because Pakistan's parliamentary, or I should say Iran's parliamentary speaker, who's leading the talks from the Iranian side, is saying that the talks will not move forward if there's not an actual ceasefire in Lebanon. It sounds like Israel has scaled back its attacks, but hasn't halted the attacks altogether. Do you think these talks are actually going to happen tomorrow?
I think a lot of diplomatic effort and intense diplomatic effort has gone into bringing things to this good stage where it stands. And Pakistan, in keeping with its long-standing tradition of making things happen on the international scene, has certainly put in a lot. Our partners, multiple partners, countries like Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt have certainly made a lot of effort. Others have made a lot of effort. So while this thing has been brought to this stage, and the delegations are either flying in or have already flown in, I believe the talks are very much on the cards. And if there are any issues, perhaps, that might not have been resolved to the satisfaction of either of the two conflicting parties, I believe those are threads that can be picked up within the talks themselves. And once they sit down in Islamabad tomorrow and discuss matters at length, if there are any wrinkles that need to be ironed out before that, that should be done. But since the delegations are either airborne, as I said, or are already there, it stands to happen, I believe.
Okay, so you're confident these talks are going to move forward. I want to be very clear on where Pakistan stands. Do you believe that there needs to be a ceasefire that applies to Lebanon in order for these talks to move forward? Because the White House and Israel is saying Lebanon was not a part of the ceasefire agreement. Iran says that's not the case. How do you see it?
I think whatever has been part of discussions going into these talks needs to be honored, whether it is one or the other point, and would certainly have a salutary impact on not just the optics or, completion of the process that has gone into reaching this stage, but the substantive discussions themselves.
I want to play you a little bit of what Vice President JD Vance had to say about the situation and Iran's lead negotiator. Take a listen to what he had to say.
I think this comes from a legitimate misunderstanding. I think the Iranians thought that the ceasefire included Lebanon, and it just didn't. let me just say this. I actually wonder how good he is at understanding English, because there are things that he said that frankly didn't make sense in the context of the negotiations that we've had.
So Vice President JD Vance saying this is all a big misunderstanding. What do you say to people who hear that and say if there was a misunderstanding about the very definition of what a ceasefire should look like, how can an agreement be reached to end these hostilities in Iran, which is far more complicated?
I think the most significant part of this whole episode that would start unfolding in Islamabad tomorrow is the constructive spirit with which both sides have approached it. I mean, it would not have been agreed to had they not been confident of the talks in Islamabad, or had they not been ready to conduct those talks in Islamabad. So while they agreed to it, and they're, I mean, either they're already there or they're on way to Islamabad as we speak, it stands to take place. And I mean, it is in the nature of conflict that it is not fully resolved until it is resolved. So that is where it's a work in progress. And if there are matters that need to be fine-tuned, the process itself, the talks themselves will address it.
And there are so many sticking points, and they're very complicated issues. What do you think can be accomplished in these talks? In other words, what are the tangible results that you think can be achieved?
Well, as a facilitator,
yeah,
the role is to bring the conflicting parties together and let them decide what satisfies them or what does not. But in diplomacy, we say that at the end of any negotiation, if both sides have a good or an equal measure of comfort or an equal measure of discomfort, then the negotiations are successful because you find the way forward. So as a facilitator, Pakistan basically is bringing them together. And we would be ready to afford maybe advice if it is solicited, if it is required, on whichever aspect it is required, and to the extent that it is required. Because ultimately it is upon the conflicting parties themselves to strike a solution. So while we wish them well, we bring the good intentions of the entire international community, because we have been receiving calls. Our leadership has been, 50 plus only yesterday, of support. So while everybody is watching with bated breath and hoping that this brings a result, what is the result exactly that the two sides are looking for will only be known at the end of it.
I have to ask you, because President Trump has warned, has threatened to hit Iran hard if no deal is reached. Do you take President Trump at his words?
I think in a conflict, hostilities are basically the name of the game. They have taken place. For now, there is an agreement on ceasefire. And for now, the word of President Trump, the word of the Iranian leadership, that they are ready to hold hostilities and go for a negotiated settlement, lend dialogue and diplomacy space and opportunity, is more in play and should be focused on. If we get this right, I think we would not have to go anywhere else. Well,
it would be hugely significant. Ambassador Sheikh, thank you so much for being here to bring us your perspective on this critical matter at this critical moment.
Thank you, Kristen.
Thank you. Wonderful to have you. Turning now to the economic fallout from the war against Iran as the conflict pushes consumer prices higher and consumer confidence lower. The Labor Department today reporting that prices jumped nearly a full percentage point in March compared to a month earlier, and 3.3% higher compared to a year ago. Those numbers fueled by the largest one-month increase in gas prices in nearly 60 years. Now, a separate survey from the University of Michigan found consumers are growing more pessimistic about the economy. economy, with consumer sentiment falling to a record low in April, down nearly 11% from March. Although we should note that most of this data was collected before this week's ceasefire agreement. NBC News business and data correspondent Brian Cheung joins me now. Brian, thanks so much for being here. So break down these numbers. What do they tell us about the health of the economy and how much the war with Iran is impacting these figures?
Yeah, Krista, and your context is so important because this report does not cover the ceasefire, but it is the first report that we're getting that shows the beginnings of this war. Again, because it covers the month of March. As you pointed out, 3.3%. That's the price change for everything here in America as far as the price tags that we as consumers see at the store, on the roads, everywhere. 3.3% higher in March of this year compared to March of last year. And you'll notice that is a notable acceleration from the 2.4% that we saw in the February to February period. I should point out, though, economists were expecting this to be high because of rising energy prices. And here's where the breakdown is seen in terms of food, energy, and shelter. Now what we're talking about are monthly figures. How much did prices change between February and March? Energy prices up by, get this, almost 11% in just 1 month. A lot of that because of the soaring price of gasoline as a result of the ships that were stuck in the Strait of Hormuz. Food prices going sideways, although we'll be watching for that because fertilizer was also stuck in the Strait. That could lead to higher food prices in months to come. But also shelter costs only up 0.3%. We watch that because that is the biggest expenditure for most Americans, just putting a roof over your head. We'll be watching for that as well.
Well, I want to ask you about the ceasefire. Has it actually had an impact on gas prices? President Trump has said when the war ends, the gas prices are going to start to drop immediately.
Yeah, well, we did see gas prices, as far as measured by AAA on a daily basis, fall by 1 cent to $4.15. But I should point out that, again, this is the overall picture on inflation rates. But when we look at gas prices, it has still been enormously higher compared to where it was prior to this war beginning. We were looking at sub $3 a gallon averages prior to this war beginning. But again, we soared well above $4 a gallon. And actually, that happened around the time that we flipped the calendar from March into April, which makes this data so important to think about within the context of it was collected over the period of March. So if you look at the April numbers, gas prices were continuing to rise. That's the reason why economists that we've heard from so far today have said it's really going to be that April report where we see inflation not just further in the categories of gasoline, but potentially in things like food and things like car prices, other types of categories as well, Kristen.
Brian, before I let you go, I have to ask you about this new figure we're getting from the University of Michigan's Consumer Sentiment Survey. It shows it fell 11% in April. What does that tell you about how consumers feel the war is impacting their finances?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's as simple as Americans don't feel good about their finances as a result of the war. It's notable that the University of Michigan saying that that number is the lowest that they've seen on record. They've only been doing this since about the early 2010s, to be fair. But nonetheless, you see what's happening at the pump. Prices are rising. That has led to a noticeable decline in how Americans feel about the economy. The concern is that this could ripple into the economy from the standpoint of Americans just choosing not to spend because they feel so pessimistic about the economy. That would start a chain of events that could really lead to other types of economic indicators deteriorating as well. We'll have to see.
All right, Brian Cheung, tracking it all for us. Thank you so much for being here on this Friday. We really appreciate it.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.